Sunday school leader. Here we are in the last lesson of this unit. Let's see what we got coming up. Remember, we are in the unit entitled Finding Meaning, Wisdom from Ecclesiastes. We're in the last lesson, lesson 6, called Full Contentment, out of Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 7 through 10, and chapter 12, verses 12 through 14. And the point of the lesson is that obedience is the key to a full life. So when you were growing up, was there a rule that your parents had that to you just didn't really make sense, but maybe you understood it better once you became an adult, and especially if you became a parent later on? I know I mentioned this several months ago in a PrepTalk video about how I wanted a Ouija board because it was advertised on TV. It was Parker Brothers. It was a game, and I didn't understand why until I got to be older, and thank you, Mama, for saying no to that. All right, and you know, most parents make rules not to be a killjoy, but to protect their kids and to help them avoid trouble and to avoid harm and to give them a happier life. And so when we look at obedience, and that's part of the key of this week's point of the lesson, is that obedience is the key to a full life. Obedience is a word that we really don't like to hear, is it? You know, you think of the military and everybody get lockstep and doing exactly what the sergeant says and not wavering a bit. And we really don't like that. We don't like that as individuals, as humans, as Americans especially. We don't like to be told what to do. Also, when I think of obedience, I think of someplace, the type of school that you send your dog to learn how to act, obedience school, okay? But it's much more than that, isn't it? All right, let's look. We're in Ecclesiastes chapter 11. We're going to start in verse 7. And as we start there, we see there's a contrast between light and darkness. And when we read these verses in context, we see that he's talking about life and death. Now, with that in mind, just kind of go along with me here with Jim's interpretation about verses 7 and 8, that life, or the light that he mentions, is good, and you need to enjoy that quickly vanishing vapor of your life that you have. But remember, death or darkness is coming, and actually you're going to spend a lot more days dead than you are alive. That's encouraging, isn't it? Get down to verse 9. If you're young, enjoy it while it lasts. The older we get, the more we realize that youth is fleeting. I know this year is the 40th reunion of my high school graduation, and I probably won't go to that because everybody that I graduated with, they're getting old and their hair's turning white and they look old, and it's really depressing. Okay, I know I'm in that category. I know last year I take 2 blood pressure medicines. One of those medicines doubled in its potency, and the other one, they quadrupled. I've got arthritis starting in this little finger here. I'm on cholesterol medicine now. I didn't have any of that problem when, 40 years ago, right out of high school. So I go to bed early. I get up early. I'm turning into an old person. Okay, we look on and we see that Solomon says to follow the ways of your heart. Wait a minute. What does Jeremiah 17:9 say? The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond all cure. And I use that Jeremiah verse a lot when I'm combating that popular saying, just follow your heart. So what gives here? Solomon's telling us one thing, Jeremiah is telling us another. Here's the thing. With Solomon, look in the last part of verse 9. What does he say? But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. All right, God gives us freedom, but that freedom has its boundaries. I think most of us are familiar with the term free range or cage free, and this refers to animals who are allowed to roam around in the pasture or in the field without being contained indoors or contained within a cage. And while that's true, there are still fences. There are still boundaries. The animals can't go wherever they want to go. They can go wherever they want to go within the boundaries of that field or that pasture. And that's kind of how I understand the freedom that we are given as believers. I believe that Solomon, what he's writing to young people is this: follow your dreams, follow your aspirations, follow your heart, but don't follow it blindly. Test it against God's will, against his word. And when you do so, you're placing yourself within those boundaries that God has placed. All right? If you don't do that, what's going to happen? There are going to be consequences. The animal runs into the barbed wire fence. When we run against God's will, there are also consequences for us as well. As he says, for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. So, just like the loving parent, the boundaries are not meant to be a killjoy, but they are designed to give you joy and to keep you from being killed. Okay? So, to boil down the first 3 verses, I would say this: live with the end in mind. And by that, it's not just death. We don't live with just death in mind. Because if that were the case, if this life is all there is, then by golly, let's go for it. Let's live like we want to and do whatever, go for the gusto and all that jazz that is being promoted today. But that's not the case. We got to know that our actions will be judged. So we live with that in mind, live with that end in mind. And Solomon repeats this thought later in fact, in the last verse of our lesson today. All right, just to be completely transparent with you here, I'm really struggling with verse 10. I'm really not sure how to interpret that. I've been looking at commentaries and reading and all that, and I'm just not sure. So I don't have anything for you on verse 10. If I have anything later on in the week, I may post a real short video. All right, but let's look on to chapter 12. We're getting down to the conclusion of the book, and we look in verse 12, and it says, beware of anything in addition to them. It's like, what's this out of the blue? We go back to verse 11, we see what Solomon says. He's talking about the words of the wise are like goads. And what's a goad? It's that stick with a point on it or a nail or something like that you'd use to prod an animal along. And Paul says that, it's hard to kick against the goads. And that's what he's talking about here. And so the words of the wise, wisdom, are like those goads that prod us along in the path that the shepherd wants us to travel. Just like the shepherd wants the animal to travel in a certain path, our shepherd wants us to travel in a certain path and uses wisdom to goad us along. So wise words can be helpful. They are helpful. They can be a little painful sometimes if we kick against those goads, can't they? So beyond God's wisdom, we need to be very careful. We need to be warned. Books galore exist, more so now than ever before. In fact, you look behind me, you see a couple of bookshelves full of books, and then the picture that you're looking at now is what I'm looking at, the wall that holds my camera as I produce this video. And so it's full of books as well. And so here's the thing: books galore, internet sites galore. We can read, we can research, we can read all this stuff, but we got to be careful. Commentaries on God's word are not God's word. The things that your pastor says may or may not be scriptural, maybe by accident. What does 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 20 and 21 say? It says, do not despise prophecies, but test everything and hold fast to what is good. So just don't listen blindly. Always listen. Don't be critical of your pastor or me or your Sunday school teacher or whatever, but listen critically, okay? Meaning you know enough about the word that from your own study that you're able to, when something is said that's not right, it kind of sends off a little red flag, all right? So we need to do that. All right, the last 2 verses. Finally, what's the whole purpose of this meaninglessness of life that we have under the sun? Well, it's to fear God. Okay, that doesn't mean to cower down and all that, but it involves respecting him and respecting his authority and knowing that there are consequences that he can impose. So there's a little bit of fear, as we think of it, involved with that. And there should be some fear involved, because it tells us right there that God's going to bring every deed, hidden or not, good or evil, into the light. All right. When we know what the consequences are, when we know there are consequences for our actions, we are less likely to do those things. All right, then we're also called not just to fear God, but going along with that is to keep his commandments. That's where obedience comes in. What does James 4:17 say? It says, if I know what I'm supposed to do and I don't do it, it's a sin. When I know what to do and I don't do it, it's disobedience. It's a sin, right? This is the duty of all mankind, to fear God and to keep his commandments. This is our purpose. This is mankind's purpose, is to respect and obey. And really the whole book of Ecclesiastes needs to be read with this understanding. It's almost like watching that movie, goodness, I don't know how many years, maybe 20 years ago or so now, The Sixth Sense with Bruce Willis. And you watch that movie and you get down to the very end and it's like, oh, that's it. And then when you watch it again, you're able to better understand the movie as it goes along because you know what that little secret is at the end. Kind of like that here. When we know what the purpose of life is, when we go back and read, starting in Ecclesiastes 1, we can better understand the entire book. It's not just pessimistic, but it's looking at life, if we live it under the sun, if we live just for this life, how meaningless it is. But to have meaning, we need to live for God. So he spent 11 chapters, and who knows how many years, searching this information out. And to me, here's what it boils down to. Life under the sun, or life just on this earth, truly is meaningless. But life has meaning when we fear God and when we obey him, when we keep his commandments, and when we live not just for this life, but for eternity. It's that saying that, like, I know we said it on this video many times. I say it in my Sunday school class many times. It's the dot versus the line. If we think of this as a timeline of eternity, and my life is just a little dot on that line, and there's a gazillion years this way and a gazillion years that way, and even with all that time, my life is just that little bitty dot right there. And so here's the thing, so many people live for the dot. Now we have to live in the dot, right? Because that's where we are. But when we live for the dot, that's meaningless. What difference does it make if we're just living for that little bit of time? We're all going to die, so what difference does it make? But when you fear God, when you keep his commandments, you're living for the line. You're living for eternity. Now, we have the freedom to enjoy our life within those boundaries set by God in his word. We're not consumed by the trappings of this world because we're not living for that dot, but we're living for the line. Because we know we have an eternity to look forward to. We have that line to look forward to with God. All right. Next week, we start a brand new unit. I'm looking forward to it because it's the hard sayings of Jesus. And sometimes these are things that we may look at and kind of skip over, and because we're not sure how to answer it or that kind of thing. But hard sayings of Jesus. I'm looking forward to delving into 6 of those and seeing what it has to say. Now remember, Easter is just a couple of weeks away, and most churches are expecting larger than normal crowds. Here's the thing. What are you going to do to prepare for your class to be a little larger than normal? Hopefully you're expecting that. You're going to have a breakfast. Can you send out some reminders to everybody on your roll, and tell them what the unit is, tell them what the Sunday school lesson is, tell them we're going to have breakfast that day, and you probably have more people than normal, but you may even have more than normal, more than that even, if you do a little bit of work on the front end. All right, don't forget what I say every time. Don't forget to pray for your class. Prayer is a very important part of your ministry of teaching. All right, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching.